The word that destroyed Liam Carter's world wasn't shouted, it was whispered across a cold glass office. Restructuring. In one breath, the single father lost everything: his job, his hope, his promise to his little girl that everything would be okay. He never imagined that the same woman who fired him, the powerful CEO who ended his career, would soon be the one screaming for her life inside a burning skyscraper. And that he'd be the man running into the flames to save her. "Your position has been made redundant," Isabella had said, her eyes flicking to a file on her desk, refusing to meet his. Her posture was ramrod straight, a portrait of executive authority. "We're streamlining the logistics department as part of our Q3 efficiency overhaul. Your role, while appreciated in the past, is no longer essential to our forward-looking strategy." Liam just stood there, the words echoing in the cavernous silence of the office. Not essential. He felt the blood drain from his face. 6 years of his life, of perfect attendance, of coming in early and staying late, all dismissed in a single, sanitized sentence. Essential. This job was the only thing standing between his daughter and genuine hardship. It was the roof over their heads, the food in their bellies, the fragile sense of stability he fought tooth and nail to maintain every single day. He had worked in the Sterling Corp warehouse since Chloe was a baby, stacking pallets and driving forklifts, his loyalty as solid as the concrete floor. He'd even had ideas for improving efficiency, detailed proposals he'd submitted through the proper channels, only to watch them vanish into the corporate void, unacknowledged. He felt like a fool for ever believing he was more than a number on a payroll sheet. He tried to find his voice, to argue, to plead, to make her see the human being standing in front of her. "Miss Vance, Isabella, please," he stammered, his voice hoarse. "I have a daughter. She's 7. I'm a single father. I've been loyal. I've given this company everything. Isn't there anything else? A transfer? A demotion? I'll do anything." Her gaze was like polished stone, cold and impenetrable. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter. The decision is final. Human Resources will provide you with a standard severance package." She finally looked at him, but there was no empathy in her eyes, only a faint, clinical pity. She extended a hand across the desk for a handshake he couldn't bring himself to take. The gesture felt like the ultimate insult, a hollow performance of civility from a woman who was casually dismantling his life without a second thought. He left her hand hanging in the air, turned, and walked out. The humiliation of that silent journey past his colleagues was a fresh wound. He could feel their eyes on him, a mixture of pity and fear that they would be next. Nobody said a word. It was a cold, public execution of a man's livelihood. The weeks that followed were a slow-motion descent into a panic he had to hide from Chloe. The severance pay was a cruel joke, barely enough to cover 1 month's rent. The city felt like a concrete jungle of closed doors. Liam sold his old television, then a silver locket that had belonged to his late wife, sacrificing precious fragments of his past for Chloe's present. Each pawnshop receipt felt like a personal failure. He applied for dozens of jobs, stacking shelves, driving delivery trucks, night security, anything, but the rejections piled up, each one another stone pulling him deeper underwater. Some were automated emails, others were polite but firm phone calls. The message was always the same: overqualified, underqualified, not the right fit. For Chloe, he constructed a careful facade of cheerfulness. He was a performer in their 2-room apartment, playing a role he didn't feel. He'd spend his days at the public library, using their free internet to relentlessly hunt for work, his shoulders aching with tension. His evenings were dedicated to Chloe, helping her with homework, reading stories in funny voices, and listening to her bright, chattering accounts of her day. Her innocent laughter was a beacon, the only thing keeping the encroaching darkness from swallowing him whole. Their world shrank to the 4 walls of their small apartment, the lingering smell of cheap noodles, and the incessant, rattling complaint of the radiator against the creeping autumn cold. He told Chloe they were on a budgeting adventure, a game to see how much money they could save. She was a smart kid. He knew she sensed the strain in his voice and saw the worry in his eyes when he thought she wasn't looking. But she played along, her resilience a source of both profound pride and crushing guilt. One evening, as he was washing the dishes, she came up to him and handed him a drawing. It was a picture of him in a superhero costume, a blue cape flowing behind him and a big, bold L on his chest. "You're my hero, Daddy," she'd said, her voice filled with a pure, unwavering faith that broke his heart into 1,000 pieces. A hero? He felt like the world's biggest failure, a fraud in a cape. He was running out of money, out of options, and most terrifyingly, out of hope. What he didn't know was that his life wasn't about to be saved by a job application, but by the distant, mournful wail of a siren and the acrid smell of smoke carried on the night wind. It was a Tuesday night, the air crisp with a promise of winter. Liam was walking home from another dead-end interview, the polite, empty words of the hiring manager, "We'll be in touch," still stinging in his ears. To save bus fare, he took a shortcut through the financial district, a canyon of gleaming glass and steel towers that seemed to mock his own predicament. That's when he saw it, a plume of thick, oily smoke pouring from the upper floors of the V Corp Tower. A skyscraper he knew housed the headquarters of several major companies, including Sterling Corp's biggest rival. The smoke thickened with terrifying speed, churning from a dirty gray to an angry, swirling black. A sickening orange glow began to pulse deep inside the building, like a malevolent heartbeat. People on the street stopped, their faces upturned, a sea of pale masks illuminated by the growing disaster. Phones came out, dozens of them, recording the spectacle. The first sirens were screaming closer, but they felt a world away, impossibly slow. Liam's first instinct, born of weariness and despair, was to just keep walking. It wasn't his building, wasn't his problem. He had enough of his own fires to put out. What could he possibly do? He was just one man, powerless. But then he heard it, a faint, high-pitched scream for help from a lower floor, a sound of pure terror that was almost immediately swallowed by the gathering roar of the fire. Something inside him, a part of him he thought was long dead and buried, broke wide open. Before the warehouse, before he was a husband and a father, Liam had been a combat medic in the army. He was trained to run toward chaos, to function when others froze, to bring order to the heart of destruction. It was a part of his identity he'd packed away with his old uniform, a lifetime ago. He saw the helpless, morbid fear on the faces of the bystanders, their phones held up like offerings to the catastrophe. And then, clear as day, he saw Chloe's drawing in his mind's eye. Asterisk. "You're my hero, Daddy." Asterisk. A hero didn't watch. A hero didn't walk away. He couldn't teach his daughter to be brave and kind by turning his back on someone in need. It wasn't who he was. In that split second, the bone-deep exhaustion of the past weeks vanished, burned away by a surge of pure, cold adrenaline. While others were filming, he ran. He found a service entrance near the loading dock, left ajar by fleeing workers, and plunged inside without a second's hesitation. The heat hit him like a physical blow, a solid wall of scorching air. The atmosphere was a toxic soup of smoke, burning plastic, and chemicals that made his eyes stream and his throat clench. His training took over. He saw a fire extinguisher case on the wall, smashed the glass, and grabbed a small hand towel inside. He soaked it with the dregs of a water bottle from a nearby garbage can and tied it tightly over his nose and mouth. It was a flimsy filter, but it was better than nothing. He moved up, using the emergency stairwell, his footsteps echoing in the eerie silence between the fire's roars. "Is anyone here? Call out," he shouted, his voice muffled by the cloth. On the 4th floor, he found a terrified security guard with a badly broken leg, pinned under a fallen ceiling tile. Liam, running on instinct, fashioned a quick splint from a broken chair leg and the man's own belt before half carrying, half dragging him to the cleaner air of the stairwell, pointing him emphatically toward the exit before continuing his climb. The fire was spreading downwards, a fiery curtain of flames sealing off the upper levels. He was running on borrowed time. On the 12th floor, the smoke was a blinding, suffocating fog. Visibility was near zero. The heat was so intense it felt like it was cooking him alive. His lungs screamed for clean air. He was about to turn back, to admit defeat, when he heard a weak, ragged cough. It came from a corner office where flames were already licking at the doorframe like hungry animals. He didn't think, he acted. He kicked the door in, the wood splintering. Inside, it was a scene from hell. Papers burned in swirling eddies of ash, and a heavy steel support beam from the ceiling had collapsed, pinning a figure to the floor beneath a high-end desk. It was a woman. She was barely conscious, her face smudged with soot, a gash on her forehead. The massive beam lay across her legs, trapping her completely. Liam didn't hesitate. Bracing himself against the desk, his muscles screaming in protest, he found a surge of desperate, primal strength and lifted the beam just enough for her to scramble and pull her legs free. He knew he had to get her out. Now. "I've got you," he rasped, his own lungs feeling like they were on fire. "I'm getting you out of here. Just hold on. You have to hold on." He half lifted, half dragged her from the inferno of the office, instinctively shielding her with his own body as the ceiling behind them gave way in a deafening crash and a shower of fiery debris. He navigated the hallway, which was now a terrifying gauntlet of cascading fire and collapsing structures. Finally, moving on pure will, they burst through the main entrance and into the blessed cold of the night, collapsing onto the pavement, just as the first responders, a wave of firefighters and paramedics, swarmed the scene. Paramedics were on them in an instant, a whirlwind of professional urgency. Liam knelt on the gritty pavement, gasping for air, his body trembling violently from the adrenaline crash. His throat felt like it was lined with sandpaper. He looked over at the woman he'd pulled from the fire. She was on a stretcher now, an oxygen mask being fitted to her face as a paramedic gently wiped the soot and blood from her cheeks with a piece of gauze. And that's when his world tilted on its axis for the second time in a month. The perfect, severe hairstyle he remembered from his firing was a tangled, scorched mess. The expensive power suit was torn and blackened beyond recognition. But the face, pale and wide-eyed with shock and pain, was utterly, horribly unmistakable. It was Isabella Vance. His heart stopped, then restarted with a painful, violent jolt. It was her, the CEO of Sterling Corp., the woman who had told him he wasn't essential, the architect of his ruin. The irony was so bitter, so profoundly and cruelly perfect, that a harsh, ragged sound that was almost a laugh escaped his lips. He had just risked everything, his life, Chloe's future, to save the one person who had single-handedly destroyed his. Isabella's hazy, unfocused eyes scanned the chaos, the towering inferno of the V Corp building, the flashing red and blue lights painting the night, the shouting faces of firefighters. Then her gaze landed on him. She saw the grime and soot on his face, his singed jacket, the raw, unwavering determination still burning in his eyes. For a moment there was nothing. Then, a flicker of confusion, which morphed into dawning recognition with the force of a physical blow. Her lips parted under the oxygen mask, a silent "you" forming on them. It wasn't a question, it was a statement of pure, unadulterated shock. In that moment, stripped of their titles and their history, she wasn't a CEO, and he wasn't an unemployed father. She was just someone who had been seconds from death, and he was the person who had refused to let it happen. The media, sensing a story, descended like vultures. Cameras flashed, blinding him. "Sir, you're a hero. Sir, can you tell us what happened in there?" Dazed and overwhelmed, Liam just shook his head, pushing past the microphones and cameras. He had to get home. He had to get home to Chloe. He melted into the night, a ghost leaving the scene of his own impossible act before anyone could get his name. As the ambulance carrying Isabella sped away, its siren wailing into the night, she stared out the back window, her mind reeling, trying to make sense of the impossible. The man who had saved her. It was him. The man she had fired. For 2 days, Liam was the city's anonymous hero. The news channels ran grainy cell phone footage of a mysterious figure emerging from the smoke, carrying the unconscious CEO of Sterling Corp. The story was electric. He ignored calls from unknown numbers, kept his head down, and focused entirely on Chloe, trying to pretend the whole nightmarish event had never happened. He played board games, helped with her spelling words, and read her extra bedtime stories. But the angry red burns on his hands and forearms, and the haunting memory of Isabella's shocked face were constant, throbbing reminders. Meanwhile, Isabella lay in a sterile, private hospital room, the beeping of monitors a steady counterpoint to her inner turmoil. The fire at a rival's headquarters, where she'd been taking a late meeting, was a public relations disaster for the city, but that was nothing compared to the storm raging within her. Her top-tier security team had identified her savior within hours, Liam Carter, employee number 74B39, fired during the Q3 logistics overhaul, single father of a 7-year-old girl. The facts lay on her tablet, a cold, brutal indictment of her actions. She remembered him standing in her office, his voice cracking as he begged, "I have a daughter." She had brushed it aside without a flicker of consideration. Business was business. You make the hard calls, you don't get emotional, and you don't look back. It was the mantra that had propelled her to the top of the corporate ladder. But now, looking back was all she could do. She pictured him not as a line item on a spreadsheet, but as a man who had charged into a furnace for a total stranger. A man who had every right to despise her, who would have been completely justified in walking away and letting the fire claim her. And he hadn't. He had saved her life at the risk of his own. The shame was a fire all its own, hotter than any flame, burning away the years of pride and the impenetrable armor of professional detachment she'd worn like a second skin. Her entire worldview, built on a foundation of ruthless efficiency, was crumbling. Eventually, a hungry young reporter, desperate for a scoop, tracked Liam down to his neighborhood. An elderly neighbor, excited by the commotion, pointed them right to his door. Suddenly, his face was everywhere, splashed across newspapers and television screens under irresistible headlines. Fired and forgotten. The hero who saved the CEO that terminated him. The story was a viral sensation. Job offers and interview requests from talk shows flooded his barely used email account. But it all felt hollow and wrong. He didn't want to be a spectacle. He didn't want 15 minutes of fame. He just wanted a steady job so he could provide for his daughter with dignity. 2 days after being discharged from the hospital, against the advice of her doctors and staff, Isabella did something she hadn't done in over a decade. She got into her own car and drove herself, no chauffeur, no security detail, to a rundown part of town. Her tinted window limo usually just passed through on the way to the airport. She stood outside apartment 3B, the peeling paint and drab hallway a world away from her penthouse. Her hand, still showing a faint tremor, hesitated before she knocked on the door. This was harder than any hostile takeover or boardroom negotiation. This was about facing the woman she had been. Liam opened the door and froze. Standing in the dim, drab hallway of his apartment building, Isabella Vance looked smaller, more fragile than the titan of industry he remembered. Her face was scrubbed clean of makeup, revealing a faint, fading bruise on her temple. She wore a simple gray sweater and jeans, not a designer power suit. For the first time, he saw her not as a symbol, but as a person. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice softer and more uncertain than he'd ever heard it. "Liam, may I come in for a moment?" He hesitated, 100 conflicting emotions warring within him. Then, with a slow nod, he stepped aside. His apartment was small, but meticulously neat. Chloe's colorful, crayon-bright drawings were taped to the refrigerator door, a gallery of love and imagination. Isabella's eyes took it all in the worn but clean furniture, the smell of soup, the child's artwork. This was the life she had nearly destroyed. "I came to say thank you," she said, finally breaking the thick, awkward silence. "There are no words, really. You saved my life." Liam just nodded, his arms crossed over his chest, as if to shield himself. "I did what anyone would have done." "No," she said immediately, shaking her head with conviction. "No, they wouldn't have. The street was full of people filming with their phones. And you, of all people, you had every reason to let me die in that office. Her voice cracked with a raw vulnerability he never would have thought she possessed. I know that. And I know you know that. My daughter thinks I'm a hero, Liam said quietly, his gaze drifting to the vibrant drawings on the fridge. I couldn't walk away from someone who needed help. That's the man I need to be for her. It had nothing to do with you, Miss Vance. The words, though true, stung her more than any accusation could have. I was wrong, she said, finally meeting his eyes directly, her own shining with unshed tears. The way I fired you, the way I dismissed you as a person, it was inhuman. I've spent my entire life believing that success meant being ruthless, that people were just assets on a balance sheet. I saw you as a number, an inefficiency to be corrected, and I was terribly, horribly wrong. She reached into her expensive handbag and took out a corporate checkbook. I want to compensate you for your bravery, and for what I put you through. Please, name any amount, it's yours. No questions asked. Liam looked at the checkbook in her hand, then back at her face. And in that moment, the simmering anger he'd been holding onto for weeks, the bitterness that had been poisoning his spirit, just dissolved. He didn't see a CEO trying to buy her way out of guilt anymore. He saw a woman who was genuinely, painfully trying to atone. Still, he couldn't take her money. I don't want your money, he said, his voice firm but not unkind. My dignity, my self-respect. They aren't for sale. I appreciate the apology, Miss Vance. I truly do. That's more than enough. Isabella stared, completely stunned. She had come prepared for righteous anger, for recriminations, perhaps even for greed. She had not expected this quiet, unshakable integrity. This man had next to nothing, yet he was refusing what could be a life-changing fortune, purely on principle. Her respect for him, already significant, solidified into something profound, something like awe. You're right, she said, slowly putting the checkbook back in her bag. A handout is an insult to a man like you. She paused, her mind, so used to finding strategic solutions, now racing in a completely new direction. A new idea formed, clear and sharp. But a job offer, that's different. This isn't charity, Liam. I am being completely serious. What I saw in that fire, your courage is obvious. But it was more than that. It was your leadership under pressure, your clear-headed thinking in the middle of chaos. Those aren't the skills of a warehouse worker. Those are executive-level skills. You didn't just save me. You managed a crisis, flawlessly, with no resources. She took a step closer, her tone now filled with a new energy. I'm creating a new position at Sterling Corp, effective immediately. Director of Emergency Operations and Personnel Safety. I need someone to overhaul our entire protocol, from the ground up. I need someone who understands that risk is human, not just a number on a report. I need someone with integrity, who will always, always put people first. I need you. Liam was speechless. It was a real job, a major one, an opportunity born not from pity or guilt, but from earned respect. He looked at Isabella, and for the first time, he saw a potential partner. He saw a second chance, for both of them. 6 months later, Liam Carter walked through the halls of Sterling Corp, not with a cardboard box full of personal effects, but with the confident stride of a respected executive. He had excelled in his new role, revolutionizing the company's safety standards and corporate culture with an empathy and practicality that had been sorely lacking. He and Isabella had forged a new, professional relationship, one built on a foundation of mutual respect and the shared trauma that had irrevocably changed them both. She was still the CEO, but she was a different kind of leader, one who listened, one who valued her employees as people, one who was more human. One afternoon, she stopped by his office, which overlooked the very city that had once seemed so cold and unforgiving. The new fire suppression system you recommended for the warehouse just passed its final inspection with flying colors, she said with a small, genuine smile. Good, Liam replied, looking up from a report detailing new employee wellness initiatives. That's good to hear. Their eyes met, and an unspoken understanding passed between them. He hadn't just saved her from a fire. In a way, he had saved her from the cold, isolating fortress she had built around herself. And in doing so, by being true to himself and the hero his daughter always knew he was, he had saved his own family. He learned that real strength isn't measured by titles or bank accounts. It's the courage to run toward the fire when everyone else runs away, the grace to forgive the unforgivable, and the quiet, unwavering dignity of a father's love. If this story reminded you that heroes don't always wear capes, and that second chances can come from the most unexpected places, please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about the hero in all of us.